Semester number 2, lesson number 22. Our aim today is, was neo-isolationism the best policy for the United States in the 1930s? And when we talk about neo-isolationism, neo, if you guys remember, means new, and isolationism is the concept of staying out of other people's affairs, other countries' affairs. And if you remember before World War I, the United States they attempted to stay out of the problems that were happening in Europe, but in the end they got pulled in. Leading up to World War II, it's a very similar situation. It's called neo-isolation. They're a new type of isolationism. So when we talk about the U.S. avoiding foreign affairs, all right, the United States wanted to avoid European affairs after World War I. After World War I, if you guys remember the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, the United States stayed so far away from Europe, all right, to make sure that they didn't get pulled into anything that was going on in Europe. The U.S. proved this by not ratifying the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. They did not want to get involved with all the things that punished Germany. They made their own agreement with Germany. They did not join the United Nations. If you remember, that was Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, and one of them was to join the League of Nations, and then his own country does not agree to it, and they do not join the League of Nations. They want to go back into this policy of isolationism where they dealt with only the things within the country, and they did not get involved in Europe. And on the right here, you have a picture by Theodore Gesell. You guys might know him as Dr. Seuss. And if you guys think about Dr. Seuss, you think of things like, Green Eggs and Ham and all those things. He also wrote political cartoons, drew political cartoons. And here is one, if you look at the book that's being read, it's Adolf the Wolf, obviously dealing with Adolf Hitler. And if you look at the woman reading it, it says America first. And the caption says, and the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But those were foreign children, and it didn't really matter. It really didn't matter. So the concept here is it doesn't matter what's happening in other countries because it only mattered what was happening in the United States. To further ensure that the United States did not get involved in these European affairs, they passed a series of neutrality acts. This limited U.S. involvement in possible future wars, which obviously is going to lead to, the World War II, which happens in 1939. The 1935 Neutrality Act banned the shipment of war materials to aggressive nations. The 1936 Act banned loans to aggressive nations. The 1937 Act extended these provisions to civil wars. And the 1939 Act banned the United States ships from carrying goods or passengers to aggressive nation ports. However, in 1941, the United States passes the Lend-Lease Act. And the Lend-Lease Act allows the United States to give allies war supplies to help with the war effort. And the Allied powers in World War II were the French and the British. And later on, the Soviet Union and the United States is going to join them. But in 1941, the United States isn't yet in the war. However, they are favoring a side. Just like in World War I, where they were giving stuff to the British, they passed this Lend-Lease Act, which allows them to lend warships and all these things. Basically, borrow these now and you could pay later for them. All right? This showed that the United States was not neutral. They took a side, and their side was the Allied side. If you guys remember, the Axis powers was the other side, which was Japan, Germany, and Italy. Steps leading to U.S. involvement in World War II. This is just a refresher from last year. Japan controls Korea, and they established control over Manchuria. So basically, they moved into parts of China in 1931. Japan wanted to expand further into Asia to control more natural resources. This is the event that triggered World War II in Asia. Japan starts to try to take over more land in Asia because they need more natural resources. The United States is an ally of China, so when Japan invades Manchuria, the United States, puts restrictions on what America will send to Japan. They stop sending them things such as oil, which Japan needed. This is going to cause some problems. Italy started to focus on expansion. They took Corfu in Greece in 1923. They controlled Albania. They reconquered Libya. And in 1935, if you guys remember, Benito Mussolini conquered Ethiopia. All right. If you remember Mussolini and a little later on, Adolf Hitler, These were fascist regimes where the glorification of the state was supreme. And finally, Hitler in Germany. Hitler violated the Treaty of Versailles. He stopped listening to everything that was said in the Treaty of Versailles. In 1937, Germany signed an alliance with Japan. In early 1938, Hitler annexes or adds Austria. At the Munich Conference of 1938, Hitler was given Sudetenland, if you guys remember, appeasement, right? Allowing Hitler to take a little bit of land so that they thought, okay, he's happy now and will avoid war, all right? However, the problem with this is it didn't work out because Hitler keeps going for more and more land. In March of 39, Italy invaded Albania. This pushed the world again to the brink of war, and by September of 1939, World War II in Europe has begun, and we're going to start talking about America's America's part in this war tomorrow. And the check for understanding today is the cash and carry policy and the Lend-Lease Act were used by the United States to A. Help fund the League of Nations efforts to maintain peace, B. Encourage British appeasement of Germany, C. Fulfill treaty obligations with Great Britain and France, or D. Provide support for the Allies in World War II without entering the war. And I didn't mention cash and carry, but I did mention the Lend-Lease Act, so that should give you an idea of what the cash and carry is. They're basically the same concept. We will talk about that answer tomorrow in class. Your activity today is to write a paragraph choosing one of the following. Either answering the aim, do you think that isolationism was the best policy for the United States? Why or why not? Use evidence from your notes to prove your point. And that should be 4 or 5 sentences. And the same for number 2. How did an act like the Lend-Lease Act indirectly involve the United States in World War II, even though they claimed they were still isolated? So discuss what the Lend-Lease Act really meant and what the writing on the wall was once they had passed this. Have a good night.